The hunting could not continue at the rate it was, so this idea of trophy hunting and only shooting an old mature male beyond breeding age was actually built out of necessity to save wildlife.
So hunting started to become more about the quality of the hunt, the quality of the chase, instead of the quantity of the take.
Another thing that Boone and Crockett is very big on is their free ranging status. We use these as indicators of overall wildlife health.
We just had the largest hunter taking typical elk with a bow here a couple of years ago that created quite a fuss amongst the elk hunting community. This year we certified a new world's record bighorn.
Bears coming from the southeastern United States. That's a newer thing. A county that we've never seen, that's exciting. That's the first time that a bear of that caliber has ever come from this area, meaning that they're doing better.
Hunting was viewed as one of those things that was a character builder. Self-reliance, self-determination. These are all skills that they're life skills. Hi, this is Keith Balfourd, Director of Marketing for the Boone and Crockett Club.
And Justin Spring, Director of Big Game Records for the Boone and Crockett Club, and you are listening to Living Country in the City.
Y'all ready for your dose of flyover state spirit? Straight from the concrete jungle? Well, put down your latte and pull on your boots. It's time for Living Country in the City.
Hey y'all, welcome to episode 76 of Living Country in the City. Living Country in the City is brought to you in part by the Go Wild app. Y'all, you've been listening to me talk about the Go Wild app for the past 4 weeks, and I'm honestly not sure there's much more I can say to really convey how huge of a fan I am. So I wanted to bring in a good buddy of mine who I met through Go Wild, and I've mentioned him before on the podcast, David the Ferguson, all the way from Scotland, to tell y'all a bit about why he's such a huge fan of Go Wild. David, so good to have you on.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well. So why don't you tell the fine folks listening what makes Go Wild so special to you?
To me personally, if I was to put it down to one thing, I would probably say the people. So you probably heard my podcast that Brad done for me. I had a really hard time over a family loss. It was a massive group of people over there, but a small group as such. We sort of called myself the Wolf Pack. I would say the level of acceptance that I got for them was enough to sort of motivate me to get back outdoors again and really start enjoying my life. And it was a massive turning point for me. So
Go Wild is honestly, like, I think I've said it on almost every time I've talked about it. It is that community.
Oh, absolutely, mate. There was a time back, probably around about December, as I was trying to do the things that I like to do, but I wasn't really getting any joy from it at all. I was out here on my own. It's the thing about Scotland is we're a small country and we're a very small population. I mean, finding people that you can really relate to with the things that you love doing, and, well, being the kind of lone redneck in Scotland that wants to bow hunt in a country that, won't let you bow hunt, there's not too many other people you can sort of come across that are into this kind of thing, It really is. I mean, I've got a huge emotional connection to this because of where I was and what it's done for me. So, I mean, I've now got to know a lot of people over there so well that they're inviting me over to America to go hunting. So I finally got an opportunity to go bow hunting, and that's to me that's a dream come true. I spent years training, years shooting at targets in the woods, most of the time on my own, and now all of a sudden I've got this massive group of brothers that are willing to help me out, make a dream come true. That's absolutely everything.
Well, we are excited to have you over here. David, thank you so much for hopping on and being willing to share what you love about Go Wild.
Oh, you're welcome, mate. You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right, also there you have it, straight from the mouth of the Ferg himself. Make sure y'all check out the Go Wild app at timetogowild.com or search for Go Wild on the iTunes or Android App Store. Also, unless this is your very first Living Country in the City podcast, and in that case, glad to have you listening, you have to have heard about the giveaway I'm doing with Go Wild. Y'all, entering is really easy, and you're already doing the main part of it right now. What y'all gotta do is, if you haven't already, download the Go Wild app and create an account. In the app, you're able to log time for doing certain outdoor activities, one of which is listening to outdoor podcasts. So what y'all need to do is log time for listening to any episode of Living Country in the City, and when you log that time, make sure y'all tag me, Samuel Ayres, Ayres, and in parentheses afterwards, you'll see Living Country in the City, so you know it's the right account. Everyone that logs time and tags me in it will get a free limited edition Living Country in the City decal. You can only get through this giveaway. And for every week up until July 14th that you log time, you'll get an entry into the grand prize giveaway, which will be a couple of Living Country in the City hats and $100 worth of your choice of Go Wild swag. So y'all get on Go Wild, start logging that time, listening to Living Country in the City, get your free decal, and get your entries in for that grand prize. Y'all can find all of the entry instructions and official rules at livingcountryinthecity.com/Go Wild giveaway. Also want to say a big thank you to Sawyer Products for being such huge supporters of the podcast. I would not be able to do what I do here at Living Country in the City without their continual support. Y'all, I am a huge fan of their products. I always told myself from day one, I am not going to work with anyone that I don't actually believe in. And y'all, every time I go out, whether it's a simple hike or a big trip, I always end up using one of their products, whether that's their insect repellent, sunscreen, first aid, or their water filtration. There is something for everyone in their product lineup, and y'all, it's all designed to keep you in the outdoors for longer, so make sure y'all check them out at Sawyer.com. All right, y'all, so moving on to today's episode. While I was on my road trip, I passed through Missoula, Montana, and stopped by the headquarters of Boone and Crockett. Now, y'all probably know Boone and Crockett best from the record keeping they do as far as like trophy sizes and things of that nature. Well, I sit down with Keith Balfourd and Justin Spring of Boone and Crockett to really dig into the history of the club and why we started measuring in the first place. You know, we all love to talk about, it's not about the inches, it's about the experience. And it is. But the whole reason we started counting those inches in the first place has a really cool reason that's rooted in conservation. So, y'all, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey, guys, how's it going?
Good, Sam.
Thank you guys so much for being willing to hop on. I know it was kind of quick turnaround there.
Not a problem. It's pretty rare to catch us both here. If you waited until September, October, you'd be hard pressed.
Well, I will take advantage of that time. But yeah, so pretty simple. We can just kind of get into it. But I just want to introduce folks to Boone and Crockett and talk about the history of it and what you guys do.
Well, we can certainly do that. Having done this sort of thing a number of times, it's pretty common for most people to have heard of Boone and Crockett through our scoring system and records keeping program for native North American big game. That's really the public face of Boone and Crockett. So if you're a big game hunter, you almost impossible to avoid seeing Boone and Crockett in magazines when describing antlers and horns on game, people talking about Boone and Crockett score, using Boone and Crockett score to evaluate the size and quality of game, that sort of thing. And certainly that's a part of what we do and what we're known for, but the real story of Boone and Crockett dates all the way back to 1887 and Theodore Roosevelt, who founded the club. Roosevelt was a big hunter, a big naturalist, very much concerned about the environment and wildlife. And he lived through the age that we call the Era of Extermination, when there was no such thing as game laws. There was no such thing as wildlife sciences. The country was developing, expanding west. Taming the wilderness was very much a part of that time. And the consequences were devastating to wildlife, especially big game species. Most people are familiar with the story of the plight of the American bison. And how, those animals roamed, in the estimates of 60 million animals at one point that were extinguished down to a few thousand animals. But that same thing that was happening to the bison was happening to our deer, our elk, our sheep, our moose, our antelope, many species of birds, many species of waterfowl. We just didn't know any better. The people that pioneered the West, and even before that landed in the New World, landed in this land of abundance, and wildlife was plentiful. It was there for the taking, and take we did. So that was really what motivated Roosevelt to form the club as the first organization to address the decline of wildlife on a national scale. And once the club and its early members got started, they quickly realized that habitat was king, and that we needed to secure places for not only wildlife to recover but thrive. And on top of that, there was actually an entirely new system that was needed between the relationship between ourselves, the environment, and wildlife. And in short order, they came up with this term and called it conservation. And the club defined it as wise and prudent use without waste. And so much of the club's early activity in its first 50 years was aimed at establishing this new system of rationing our use of natural resources. And it wasn't just hunting or wildlife, but land, timber, water, soils, because like I said, habitat was an important component. If you're going to recover wildlife, they needed a place to make a living. So the club was active in a lot of the early legislation that was aimed at conservation. Roosevelt himself, once he became the 26th president, used the power of the pen to set aside 250 million acres of federal public lands, state lands. The club was instrumental in developing the National Park Service, the National Forest Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, what we call the expert agencies, to ensure that these natural resources were managed by trained professionals. Then the club got into funding conservation has a price. It moved to establish what we now know as the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is an excise tax on sporting arms and ammunition that's collected by the federal government and then distributed to the state wildlife agencies to help fund their budgets. The club was involved in establishing the federal duck stamp program. Literally, safe to say that everything that we see today that is related to natural resource conservation and preservation and the funding models, game laws, hunting seasons, that entire package was either established by Boone and Crockett, promoted by Boone and Crockett, supported by Boone and Crockett members, and the entire story of North American conservation itself is not that well known. Many sportsmen know that story because they've read the books, but the broader public has no idea. And we're at a place in time now where people are even confused as to what conservation is and what it means. A lot of people are confusing it with preservation, and that's presenting challenges. Roosevelt's philosophy was that, and he's got a famous quote, conservation means development as much as it does protection. His view was there was no way to just unilaterally preserve everything, lock people out, don't allow access, because he wanted to create citizen conservationists. He wanted, his view was if people had access to wildlife, access to fish, access to the outdoors, they would become engaged. They would benefit directly from that access. They would support conservation. They would be conscious about, saving some for today so there would be game to hunt tomorrow. And he really held conservation up as a duty of citizenship. So that's kind of a quick history lesson and overshot of what the Boone and Crockett Club has been in the past. And that same legacy is what we do today. We still continue to get actively involved in habitat work, conservation policy, good legislation for conservation, advocacy for hunting, the funding mechanisms. We're still greatly involved in ensuring that there's enough money flowing to take care of the environment, to take care of wildlife, training, the conservation leaders of today, investing in careers, the people that are choosing to be in wildlife and habitat, and so on and so forth. So that was a long way around the horn, but when you're 130 years old, which we're actually 132 now, Obviously, there's a lot of history.
So if you had to summarize now kind of the goal or the mission statement of Boone and Crockett, how would you summarize that?
Probably the best way without going on for another 10 minutes is the club supports what we call the North American model of wildlife conservation, which is the activities of hunting and fishing and recreating in the outdoors is what drives and funds conservation. So we're actively involved in maintaining that system and in keeping things at arm's length that threaten that system.
So now we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but I'd say most people are familiar with Boone and Crockett from the concept of trophy scoring. Tell me a little bit about that and Boone and Crockett's history with that and how that kind of came about.
All right, so it's interesting, like you say, trophy scoring. Trophy's got a very negative connotation today, obviously. It was built out of necessity, which all goes back to Roosevelt and the whole basis of conservation and saving wildlife. At the time, the early members had written that the wilderness was gone, that there was no hunting to be had, that everything was over. So they started this whole records keeping, trying to document what was once on the North American continent, so our generation could come and go to a museum and see what used to be here. In the beginning, that was a national collection of heads and horns. They thought that it was too late. So that's where our records kind of started, was creating that national collection and preserving what was once here to show people what they'd lost through their greed and, over-exploitation of wildlife. Well, this went on for a while until, some of these other conservation mechanisms that we put into place, the game laws, the Pittman-Robertson putting funds available to reintroduce wildlife, until those started to take hold. Yellowstone National Park was around when we started, but we actually sent in folks to help defend the laws there, to prevent poaching. Yeah, we had a national park, but we had no way of preventing folks from going in there hunting. So with the work of the early club, basically wildlife conservation started to work, and animals were no longer a thing to see a dead mounted head in the zoo, or, in the zoo. You could go to Yellowstone, you could go out on the landscape and see it. So this was kind of a big transition for BNC. But at this time, this is all fair chase and whatnot, which we can get into, like I was going to touch on, trophy. The hunting could not continue at the rate it was. And so the club started a records program that said, if we concentrate our harvest on older, mature males, there'll be no negative effect on the population. So this idea of trophy hunting and only shooting an old, mature male beyond breeding age was actually built out of necessity to save wildlife. But from that, it all worked. And so as we got into, the 40s, obviously war took place. Once that was all settled down and done with, the club came together and said, what can we do with this data set? So they developed a scoring system in 1950 that recognizes management, recognizes quality habitat, everything, with the idea being you couldn't record every single critter that was harvested, but if you took a snapshot of the very best, everything had to be in place to get to that level. So if an area was putting out numerous of these top-end trophies, something management-wise was good there. And it started a data set of all of North America where we could see where areas that's working, where areas that it's not working, and then try to figure out why certain areas were having better management than others to use as a management tool. And that was in 1950. We continue running that data set today with the same end goal. Why did we used to see a lot of deer coming from this county in northern Minnesota, and we don't see as many now? What changed there? Is this a effect of climate change? Is this an effect of habitat? Is this effect of management policy of people on the landscape? So, everybody says, I got a bull that scores 370. Well, that 370 number is just it's a number to show, that everything's in place as a quantifier to solid management that got them there. Again, we live it. If you have any questions on any of this, let us know. This is what Keith and I do 24/7. So we get a little pulled down in the weeds sometimes. But if something we say is not making sense or whatever, please ask questions of us too as we go through this.
So what, you mentioned the term fair chase. What constitutes fair chase? That's not a loaded question at all, is it?
Yeah. Before we can effectively answer that, it's probably important to kind of set the table here a little bit. We mentioned there was a time of lawlessness. There was no such thing as hunting seasons or bag limits. There was no selectivity in the harvest. We shot males, females, young, old, and we already know, and we've explained that was just not a sustainable practice. And so Roosevelt, in his vision and in his wisdom, knew that there was going to have to be restrictions. So if you take an entire generation that was used to, no limits, no rules, no regulations, no sideboards, and we still had a fairly substantial subsistence hunting going on. I mean, people were hunting for food. This was back before we had, the big crops and the farms and the well-developed livestock industry. So this concept of self-restraint was very much part of a conservation ethic, being selective and hunting more for the experience than the harvest. So hunting started to become more about the quality of the hunt, the quality of the chase, instead of the quantity of the take. So that's where fair chase came from. That's how it became part of a conservation ethic. In time, it became kind of the credo of the sportsman. This is how we conduct ourselves in the field. We want to pursue game in a fair and sportsmanlike manner. This was just a way to approach hunting that was socially acceptable. That was another thing. There was a lot of people that once they realized that wildlife was disappearing, there was a strong movement to stop all hunting altogether. And in order for hunting to withstand that public pressure, it had to be shown that it was done under rules, guided by laws, and that the people that participated in hunting were principled men and women that cared about something more than just killing. Another aspect of fair chase that's important is, and we didn't discuss this yet, was the industry of commercial market hunting. That was an industry, all the buffalo hunters and all that stuff that you see in history, Buffalo Bill Cody, and basically the drain down of buffalo. And we also mentioned that was happening to deer and elk and other species. Roosevelt, in his vision of promoting conservation as the best way forward, which again was wise and prudent use, not non-use, wise and prudent use without waste, was looking for I'm a marketing guy, so I'll call it a marketing slogan. He was looking for something that would differentiate the gentleman sportsman from the commercial market hunter. The hunter that hunted for personal reasons, not commercial gain. And that's where fair chase fit. That was the differentiator. If you're hunting for, a commercial meat market, it's as many as you can shoot in the least amount of time with the least amount of effort. That wasn't a hunt, it was a shoot. Roosevelt was trying to elevate on the other side, which was the sport hunter, the gentleman hunter. And that's the guy who became the revered and accepted member of society. And the market hunter got pushed to the margins. And eventually the club passed legislation that did away with market hunting, but it took several years for that to happen. So that's kind of the backstory on fair chase. And that's carried, that's a wisdom transfer. That's something that's passed on from generation to generation. Fathers taking their sons and daughters out, showing them, this is how we hunt, and we have a moral responsibility to the game that we hunt, and that taking a life is a serious matter and it's not to be overlooked. So your conduct in the field and whether you choose to shoot or not shoot, your approach, your preparation, your skill with your weapon, knowing where your arrow is going to hit, knowing where your bullet's going to hit, not shooting, taking risky shots at running games, stuff like that. That all rolls into a fair chase ethic. And so today, fair chase is practiced widely by the majority of sportsmen. A lot of them are fair chase hunters. They just don't call it fair chase, but there's something that says, hey, this is how I run. This is how I operate. And that ethic is as important it was at the time when people were wanting to end all hunting is even as critically more important today. More eyes are on hunting. Hunting is being criticized. It's being looked at harshly. We already talked about the negative stereotype with trophy hunting. More people are engaging. There's a growing public empathy for wildlife in general. So being able to demonstrate that sportsmen have a code of ethics that they follow that's been passed on from generation to generation that extends beyond the law is vitally important for the future of hunting and the image of hunters in hunting.
So now for a harvest to qualify for Boone and Crockett, does it have to be considered fair chase?
For the hunter's name to be listed in the record book, it must be taken under fair chase conditions. Now, we also maintain this as a scientific data set, so picked up head, something, perhaps an animal that wasn't found or something. It was still created by the management system, so it does have a place in the records. But for someone's name to be listed next to a taken animal, they must follow that fair chase ethic in order to have their name listed as a fair chase hunter next to that animal.
So what would be then I guess, because we talked a little bit about fair chase, and to some extent it's a, I don't want to say a gray area, but it doesn't have necessarily a hard and fast definition. What would be, for someone to get their name listed, what would be that definition on?
There is a list of basic requirements that we have. First and foremost, all laws must be followed. Another thing is no transmission of information to the hunter with electronic devices, which we've drawn the line at. You can't talk somebody into a deer on a radio. Sit on a ridge away and say, "Hey, go left, go right." That goes above and beyond. Any animal, and one that a lot of people don't realize, any animal that's trapped naturally or artificially, two locked deer, the aspect of the chase, the ethical thing is probably to put those deer out of their misery, assuming you have the license and whatnot. But that isn't a true fair chase hunt. Those would be listed as picked up heads in our book because they did not have a reasonable chance to escape. They were helpless basically. Some other, like I said, it's on there. I don't know if Keith has it up in front of us, but there is a very basic list of rules. But when we're talking fair chase, that's kind of like this is the bare minimum to be a fair chase hunter. And we'd expect most of those hunters that take it seriously to take it well beyond that level, because there's more to it than just a set of, a few written laws to conduct yourself within.
Well, Sam, you did bring up a good question. Gray area is probably not the right term, but it can be hard for folks to get their head around because there is a portion of fair chase that we call falls within the spirit of the hunt. And it is more of in the spirit of the hunt than a set of written rules. And that's kind of as it should be. We don't need, a thicker and thicker rule book like an IRS code. That would be a red flag that, this activity's got problems if they've got this many rules and this many laws. So it is left up to the individual to decide, what's necessary, what works for them, what provides them with the experience that they seek. And, if they make a poor choice or a poor decision and they regret that decision, learn from it, not repeat that, That's all part of a fair chase ethic. We do have a definition for it. We call it the ethical, sportsmanlike, and lawful pursuit of the taking of any free-ranging, wild, big game animal in a manner that did not give the hunter an improper or unfair advantage over that animal. So there is a definition, but again, this has more to do with, like I said, in the spirit of the hunt, in the spirit of the chase. Once you move outside of that, then you have to ask yourself, am I really hunting anymore, or am I just shooting? And that's probably a pretty good differentiator. You're just going out and shooting things. There's not much of a hunt there. Arguably, there's not much of a chase. Outside of shooting skills, there may not be any skills involved, tracking, locating game, understanding the time of year and what the game may be doing, or where they're going to show up, or where they're traveling to or traveling from. And, that all is part of the hunting experience is cracking the code of wild game. That's why a lot of people like hunting the rut, whether it's the elk rut or the whitetail rut. There's a lot of activity there. There's some things that can tip the odds in your favor in terms of predictability. But hunting is meant to be hard. It's meant to be have an effort involved. You talk to any hunter, and they'll tell you that some of their most memorable hunts were the hardest ones, and they didn't get anything, but they learned, they put in the effort, and so that's a part of hunting that is hard for non-hunters to get their head around. Is why would you spend all this money and all this time and you didn't get anything, and that was still a good experience? Yeah. So that too is part of fair chase.
All right, let's pause right there really quick just to hear a word from one of my partners. All right, y'all, I'm not afraid to admit that I'm a huge geek when it comes to games, and well, let's face it, a lot of other things too. However, when it comes to nerdy card and board games, I really can't get enough. So when I found out there was a card game out there combining two of my passions, hunting and nerdy adventure games, I really had to pick it up. The game is called Gut Pile, and the goal is to build the ultimate Alaskan hunt. You do so by collecting several cards including animals such as grizzly bear and moose, hunting locations like Yonder Mountain and Nunya Creek, as well as weaponry, gear, and transportation. But make sure you've got tags or donuts handy because you never know when an Alaskan state trooper will drop in unannounced. It's a great game and a ton of fun for hunters who are inspired to share stories about their past hunts, as well as non-hunters who can be brought into discussions about hunting in a very non-threatening way. If you'd like to learn more, check out my podcast with the guys at Gut Pile Games by visiting livingcountryinthecity.com/22 and get $5 off your order from Gut Pile Games by visiting our partners page at livingcountryinthecity.com/partners. So in addition to fair chase, what are some of the other qualifications for, I guess, an animal to be considered for the Boone and Crockett record books?
Again, it has to be meet that threshold that we've set. That very top percentage. Generally speaking, those specimens are going to be well along in life. They have genetically already contributed to the overall game population. A real common thing we hear is, if you concentrate your efforts on the biggest and the best, you're going to decrease your gene pool. Well, the prime breeding by these species is not at this end of life stage when we're trying to promote that being what the hunter's looking for to get an entry. But they have to meet a minimum score. They have to fall within fair chase. They have to be measured by an official measure. We have 1,400 of them roughly out there that volunteer their services to, administer the scoring system equally, review everything. So it's a pretty in-depth process to, ensure the fair chase component was there, ensure that everything was in place to get that entry into Boone and Crockett. And it is a badge of honor for many hunters, once in a lifetime experience. There's a lot of tremendous hunters that may go through life without ever seeing an animal of that caliber.
So what types of species does Boone and Crockett record?
All of North America's native big game animals. We get questions about hogs. Well, hogs are not native to North America, so we don't record those. But, 5 species of caribou, 3 different species of elk, 5 species of deer, 4 species of bears that we have. Basically all the native game, big game that was in North America, we record. And amazingly, in North America, everything that was here when we got, when we started this club is still here today and in better numbers than when we started.
So you not only record, say, deer, but you also break it down to like whitetail, mule deer,
Columbia blacktail, Sitka blacktail, Cow's whitetail. Yeah, and it's on a. We have rules. I mean, genetically they need to be separated. It needs to be a scientifically based category. We don't have categories that, the deer in western Montana seem to be a bit smaller than eastern Montana, so we'll create a category. It's all scientifically based on the best research. And we constantly have a committee, a 32, 38 member committee that every year meets, and we discuss these things. Are we seeing trends? Is there science coming forward? Is there new genetics that suggest perhaps there is a subspecies or something going on? So it's a constantly evolving data set with whatever we can learn, whatever we can see in those numbers or modern wildlife management shows us, we do take that into account for that reporting.
So say something like the Cow's whitetail, that's a newer one you guys have recently added, correct? Or
the Cow's whitetail has been a category for quite a while. Sitka blacktail, I want to say, was one of the newer ones, and then a non-typical category for Sitka was added. The Cow's whitetail was, if you go back to glaciation, whatever, they live at a high elevation in the desert, and basically the desert served as a boundary, so they adapted on their own at that higher elevation, which was what created a separate species. And O'Connor and these old school gun riders, I mean, they knew about them and they were hunting them back then. So, that one's been around forever. Another example, there is a Columbia whitetail deer. It's another whitetail that's on the coast of Washington and Oregon. Used to be a lot more prevalent. We looked at doing that. The species as a whole could not support a category, and even though it is genetically different, that's one that the club said no, in terms of wildlife management, creating a separate category for that would not be appropriate, even though it is a different species than a Cow's whitetail or your normal whitetail you see throughout the majority of the country.
And now, so you also mentioned, say, the difference between, a hunter's name getting added next to the animal versus just taking down this data solely for record-keeping purposes. But you also take down data for other situations too, right? Say somebody finds an enormous deadhead or something along those lines.
Yeah, no, we record any. I mean, we had a deer that was in road kills. One of our biggest whitetails was found dead off the side of a road. The state still created that deer. The wildlife management was in place. Just because a hunter didn't take it doesn't mean that animal doesn't have a value to gauging how healthy a system is. So yeah, we record basically the method of take or how it meets its demise does not really matter as long as it's a native free-ranging animal of North America. Which is another thing that Boone and Crockett is very big on, is the free-ranging status. We use these as indicators of overall wildlife health. If an animal is taken inside an enclosure, that's not part of that entire ecosystem's population. So for us, that is not a valid data point. We do not include anything that's from an enclosure because it doesn't say anything about the overall wildlife's health of the area.
So do you have any examples maybe of some learnings you've taken from this and how it's maybe been applied to conservation, or maybe some anecdotes or anything where you can say, we saw this happening or we saw this recurring issue because of this kind of record keeping?
Probably the biggest scientific piece that's come from it. There was a situation in Alberta where they showed a decrease in horn length at age on some sheep in a particular situation. That was a very unique situation, but they tried to extrapolate that out and say hunters are driving down the size of the top end of game. our data set was taken up by 5 or 6 different professors that they did an overall analysis of our overall, final net score on these species and looked at that and said, are hunters doing this? Are we driving down the size of game? And then they've looked at it genetically, and it's still an ongoing topic, but that was the use for our data that was done on a, North American scale of trying to see if, using our data set, could we predict increases or drops in overall horn or antler size on numerous different factors. They also looked at, a particular oscillation disk to try to quantify climate change to that and say, is this an effect of this? They looked at as many different, factors as they could. And our data set is the only data set of its size and age that you could do this type of work. And is it perfect? Oh, definitely not. I mean, if we could go back to 1950, obviously there's some things we've changed, but it is the very best and very unique data set out there. States have used it over time. Why are we trending up? Why are we trending down? So it is used extensively in the wildlife field.
So is all of this data publicly available for anyone that wants to access it, or?
Within reason. We do have a trophy search application you can sign up for on the website that gives you access to all our accepted trophies. Generally, we're approached by a managing agency that says, hey, I'm interested in this. We can do a lot more filtering down of the data to get them exactly what they're looking for.
Kind of a custom data poll.
Right. I mean, they only care about, white-tailed deer taken in these 28 counties since 2017 or 2014. That's the general request we get. So it's not an online database that people can go in and just cruise beyond that trophy search, but it is available for researchers to look at.
So what are some of the cool animals that have come in? What are some of y'all's favorites?
Oh,
I
know that's asking to probably pick a favorite child right there, but
well, a lot depends on your interest. If you look at the record book, there's some species that are very difficult to find a Boone and Crockett trophy, like typical mule deer, for example. That's one of the harder ones to put in the book. And so when you see Boone and Crockett qualifying mule deer, it's newsworthy, it's substantial. We just had the largest hunter taken typical elk with a bow here a couple of years ago that created quite a fuss amongst the elk hunting community. This year we certified a new world's record bighorn. There's interesting aspects all over the records program. If you step back and looked at this from 60,000 feet, you could see that we're taking more and larger specimens now than at any time in history, which is probably the opposite of what most people think. I mean, most hunters think, oh God, if I lived back in the day, there's big elk and big deer everywhere. That's not really the case. Those big elk and big deer are living now, which again flips back to what Justin was saying, is a testament to the success of our systems of conservation management programs, the better science that we have, the better control we have relative to, harvest quotas, how many animals the habitat can sustain, when it reaches that threshold, when we should take more, when we should take less. So we're just doing a better job all the way around. So every 3 years when we produce a records book, it's loaded with some of the largest ones that have ever been taken, new state records, new world records. Now, there are a few world records in the book that, date back a long ways. I think 1914 is one of them. One of the caribou that's a world record is the oldest one in the book. And then there's always the talk of, where is the next new world record whitetail going to come from? Where's the next, world record elk going to come from? And so that's always good campfire chatter. And that's good stuff. That means that hunters are paying attention, they're engaged, and this idea of selectively hunting, holding out, extending your hunt, has gained a lot of popularity and traction, and so has, people taking a more active role in the lands that they hunt on. That's why you're seeing food plots and people planting crops specifically to enhance the game on the lands that they hunt on. And so that's active, habitat and wildlife stewardship, and that's a good thing. And a lot of these bigger whitetails that we're seeing are partly coming from that personal stewardship that people are doing.
And Keith touched on, the biggest and the largest ever definitely gets attention, but, for me, bears coming from the southeastern United States, that's a newer thing. A county that we've never seen, that's exciting. That's, to us, it barely squeaks in, but that's the first time that a bear of that caliber has ever come from this area, meaning that they're doing better, and so, the big named ones, we deal with those, but those aren't the ones that stick out for me. I'm talking to my buddies like, hey man, guess what? Arizona's cranking out giant bears. We need to look at going down there maybe, something like that is to me where the excitement lies and watching these records come in and this data set fill out.
So that's gotta be a pretty nice little bit of insight though for y'all's hunt trips, huh? It's gets
we're waiting in trophies here. There's no question about it.
You get the inside scoop if you're planning on hunting out of state, I suppose.
Well, it's kind of fun. Like I said, that trophy search thing. You can set the dates and what areas are doing better. What historically they always put out big heads. What is it now and what changed? And everybody's got a theory on it, but the data is there in that trophy search that you can really, really go in depth and see, where areas going up, where areas going down, why might that be? One thing that I found very interesting is looking in that data set, the West Coast. I grew up in Oregon, big blacktail hunter. That was my childhood, was chasing blacktails around. Well, when did these biggest ones happen? Following big stand clearing fires, a big opening, we'd see a big bump in these. And so there's a lot of stuff in that data set that a hunter or anybody interested in wildlife can look at and be, what landscape-wide changes resulted in big jumps or drops too. So it goes beyond hunting, just an overall landscape management, overall wildlife and landscape health question. We can see in our data what's good and what's bad.
And that search is available up on the Boone and Crockett website?
Yep, that is on there.
Fantastic. So if people wanted to find Boone and Crockett online, where are they headed?
BooneandCrockettClub.com.
Are y'all on social media at all? Instagram, yep. Facebook, any of that?
Yep, we're very involved on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the social media channels. We have a YouTube channel. We used to produce a television series for a number of years. A lot of those episodes are available online.
Fantastic.
So we may be 130 years old, but we did figure out how to run a computer.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes page. This will be episode 76, so livingcountryinthecity.com/76. So one thing I always like to ask as we're kind of winding down, this podcast is dedicated towards folks who are new to hunting or just, may not have had the background or grown up in it and kind of could possibly feel intimidated by getting into the outdoors. What advice would you give to somebody that came to you and, maybe they were just passing through town and checking out the trophies and said, I'm really interested in getting into this hunting thing, but I don't know, I'm from the city or, I've never done it before. What words of wisdom would you give to them?
Well, I wish I had a better answer. That's one of the challenges that the entire hunting community is trying to overcome is that entry point aspect. I'm fortunate, Justin probably as well, and most people that, my dad hunted and my uncles hunted. And so, ever since I was a little kid, I tagged right along and I got interested in it that way. joining organizations, like Boone and Crockett, like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, like the Wild Sheep Foundation. There are what we call critter groups that are focused on the advocacy and conservation of a particular species. That's a great place to, break bread with other people that hunt. And in local communities, there are local sportsmen's groups. They host events, 3D bow shoots, sporting clay shoots, the rifle range. Those are some places to, interact with other people. The fishing game departments typically have some programs going on. There's youth camps. There are ways to go. It's just you can't flip through. I'm going to date myself and say yellow pages, but yeah, you just can't flip through the yellow pages and say, hey, go hunting here. So it is a bit of a challenge for folks just trying to get into it. But there are ways. Sporting goods stores, people that sell, hunting equipment. Most states, I believe, require a hunter certification course to get your first license. That's always a good first step. There's programs called Becoming an Outdoors Woman that are specifically designed to introduce gals to hunting and shooting and fishing, so folks can find those. So with a little snooping around, you can find your way in.
And I guess if I had to just give advice, just get out there. People don't realize that's my biggest thing. Pretty much no matter where you are in the country, there's wildlife. There's wildlife that people don't even know exists, and just start going out there. See what's there. Spend some time walking around in the woods. Figure out what all those tracks going down the side of the road are. That's all part of it. And soon enough, you realize that, thanks to conservation, we are surrounded with abounding opportunities to, be it birds or fish or big game or rabbits, anything like that. There is ample opportunity. And the other thing is that the funding that makes sure that this stays all comes from hunters. So buy a hunting license. Don't be discouraged if you don't find success. You're contributing to the greater good of wildlife for the future, even if you don't fill that tag. So there's really no negative to trying to get out there and figure it out. I mean, depending on what your skill set is or what you're comfortable with, like Keith pointed out, there's a lot of programs that are available that, can't really beat experience of being in the woods. It doesn't suck, I guess.
Fantastic. I just want to say thank you guys for hopping on. Any final closing thoughts, anything about Boone and Crockett that we may have missed that you guys want to touch on?
Well, maybe not with Boone and Crockett, but just hunting in general. Obviously, unless you've been living under a rock, there's a lot of negativism around hunting right now. And a lot of that is lack of information, lack of knowledge, combined with misperception. But being a hunter, there's a lot of pride and ownership because of the system of conservation that we just talked about. But also you'll find, hunting, and this goes all the way back to even before Roosevelt's time, hunting was viewed as one of those things that was a character builder. Built character skills like self-reliance, self-determination, self-control, confidence, problem solving. These are all skills that they're life skills, and hunting teaches that, fishing as well. So being a sportsman, being an outdoorsman, there's a lot of tradition, a lot of history, but there's a lot of things that can be learned, not only about the environment where we live and animals that we interact with, but a lot about ourselves that can be useful in careers, relationships, parenting, the whole package. So this anti-hunting negativism aside, I can tell you that some of the finest folks I know are outdoorsmen, and some of the best workers, just good people, good friends, good parents, good mentors, not getting in trouble with the law, all that kind of stuff. And that's a byproduct of an outdoor lifestyle. So I would encourage people not to listen to the detractors, and if you want to hunt and fish, go for it.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for hopping on. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm glad I was able to get both of you in a room together.
Hey,
Sure thing.
Anytime.
All right, y'all, that'll do it for episode 76 of Living Country in the City. A big thank you to Keith and Justin for taking the time out of their day to hop on the line with me. Make sure y'all head on over to the show notes page at livingcountryinthecity.com/76 and check out everything we talked about today's episode. Also, make sure y'all are logging that time for listening to Living Country in the City in the Go Wild app. Get your free limited edition decal and get your entries for that grand prize. But in the meantime, keep it country, y'all.
Thank y'all for listening to Living Country in the City. Get show notes and check out the blog, product reviews, events, and more at livingcountryinthecity.com.